Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. We have yet another severe weather event on tap for Saturday, February 15th, coming up in a couple days. The SPC has outlined an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 in the orange shaded region here. So basically from the Louisiana-Texas border all the way through the northern half of Louisiana, much of Mississippi, into western Alabama with a large slight and marginal risk surrounding that. So another potent setup is on tap for Saturday. We just are coming on the heels of yesterday's event, Wednesday, February 12th. Didn't quite go as expected. Models had uptrended quite a bit going into that event, but we didn't really come out with a real widespread, significant severe weather event, thankfully. Few stronger tornadoes in there, but nothing too widespread and too intense yesterday, thankfully. But this weekend could provide another opportunity for yet another significant severe weather event, especially within the enhanced risk region you see here. So given that we're a few days out still, wanted to just do a brief video on the comparing and contrasting of our main models. We, of course, will do some more intricate analysis as we get closer to the event, when we have a little bit better observed data to look over. But for now, let's just go ahead and compare our main models. We're going to compare, as usual, the NAM, the GFS, and the European model. This is going to be the 12Z NAM, the 12Z GFS, and the 6Z Euro. 12Z Euro is out over on Pivotal, but to keep consistency here with the other models, I'm going to use DuPage, and the 12Z Euro is not quite out yet on the College of DuPage site. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We'll start off with the 500 millibar pattern. Here is that trough that was the main forcing mechanism for yesterday's severe weather event across the southeast. That will continue to move out, and you see this belt of stronger flow back in here impinging upon California today in the western U.S. coast. That is going to be our next weather maker, our next system for this upcoming event here on Saturday. You see that strong belt of flow starts to impinge upon the southern plains Friday evening. Very broad trough, not really any compact little short waves moving through this trough, but just a broad trough encompassing the western half of the country. And then as we go into the day on Saturday, we see the most of the central into the kind of northeast portion of the country entrenched within this belt of stronger southwesterly flow aloft. And this is a little bit of a concern for this particular setup. Watch what happens as we go through the day on Saturday. And remember, this is just the NAM run. We'll take a look at the GFS and European model in just a second. But as we go through the afternoon, we really don't have any strong forcing impinging across our enhanced risk region. Just a real glancing blow from this mostly belt of unidirectional flow out here in the exit region of this trough. The trough is overall fairly positively tilted, drawing an axis right through the kinks and the height contours there. Definitely a positively tilted trough. And so we've talked about the impacts of positively tilted versus negatively tilted troughs. You tend to want a more negatively tilted trough for a stronger significant severe weather event, because that leads to a more robust low-level response. But that is not what we're seeing with this particular case. And that is one of my, when I'm going through and seeing whether I want to chase a setup in the southeast or not, the trough progression and evolution is one of my big check marks. We saw it the other day, yesterday, in fact. One of the mechanisms that may have held that event back was that we didn't have strong forcing over the warm sector. We had enough warm advection to get storms going, but you need strong background synoptic scale forcing to allow those storms to persist and mature and really hit their ceiling. We just didn't have that yesterday, and that looks to be a problem with this upcoming setup as well. This is at 21Z, so 3 p.m. Central Time on Saturday, and we just don't have really hardly any forcing at all across what looks to be the enhanced risk region here from East Texas into Alabama. Just a very glancing blow, not really any strong, not really any well-defined exit region of this trough impinging upon this area, and that is a major concern. I will take you to one of our, gold banner examples here of a past southeast severe weather outbreak, April 27, 2011. This is the 500 millibar pattern on that day. Here's your jet streak that you're watching, and number one, the trough takes on a nice negative tilt with time, but look where that trough is located. Your warm sector was situated across Mississippi and Alabama, and you see that shortwave moving right through that warm sector at that time. We're very in much closer proximity to the forcing with this little shortwave trough here, and that allowed storms to develop and really mature in the warm sector on that day to allow for a big outbreak. Here, not really seeing that at all. Again, we're just well ahead of the exit region of the trough, and within this just broad southwesterly flow. It's not even all that strong southwesterly flow. So that is a major concern I have with the upcoming event as far as reaching its ceiling, as far as open warm sector supercells go. We will likely have warm advection ongoing, but this is a major concern I have that might hold this event back. Is just we're not really seeing any synoptic scale forcing for ascent in the warm sector, at least here initially at 500 millibars. During the day, especially across the southeast on Saturday. Again, this is at 3 p.m. We go to 6 p.m., and then finally overnight, the trough really starts to dig its way into the southeast, and by Sunday morning, that's when I think we could have a more robust event as we have much stronger forcing here across the warm sector. We'll see how the actual geometry of the warm sector shapes up across Saturday and Sunday, but we'll have much stronger forcing here for overnight Saturday into Sunday morning, and that may be when the prime time of this event is expected to be. Definitely some concerns as far as the trough location and how it's situated here relative to our area of interest for the daytime on Saturday. Let's take a look at the GFS and see what it is showing. Again, here is our trough from yesterday's event, going to quickly move on out to the east, and you see there over across the west coast, that is our next trough making its way in. So through the day on Friday, trough starts to impinge upon the southern plains, and here we are 3 p.m. on Saturday, 3 p.m. Central on Saturday. Very similar look to what the NAM was showing. Very kind of sheared out, almost positively tilted trough, strong belt of southwesterly flow out ahead of it. But over here across the southeast, across that enhanced risk region, not much to speak of. A very, very glancing blow from this really not all that compact of a jet streak aloft. We compare it to where the NAM was 21Z Saturday, very similar solution. GFS is maybe a little bit more amplified than the NAM, which would mean perhaps a little bit more of a robust low-level response, but still the positioning of the trough, the axis still well back here across Oklahoma and Texas, and just a glancing blow from the stronger flow aloft here across our enhanced risk region, much like what the NAM was showing, although the NAM certainly is a little less potent in its solution as far as the geometry of the 500 millibar trough goes. Let's now take a look at the European model. So we'll go forward in time. Our lead trough moves out. The second trough moves in. Here we are, 21Z on Saturday, and much of the same. Definitely more amplified than the NAM. We see it is a more amplified trough than what the NAM was showing. I'll quickly switch back to the NAM. So the GFS and European models definitely on the slightly more amplified side of things versus the NAM, but overall that axis of the trough well back here across West Texas into western Oklahoma. This might be the least progressive of the three, and that would bode even worse for the enhanced risk area here on Saturday. And again, we're focusing mainly on open warm sector supercells, as that is where the majority of your significant tornado outbreaks come in the southeast. Very much your open warm sector supercells have the best chances of producing significant tornadoes. Of course, we will have a component along any frontal zones here back to the west, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But overall, open warm sector activity definitely in question, given that we don't really have a forcing mechanism during the day out across this region. Going back to the GFS real quick, we'll go through the night on Saturday into Sunday. You see that trough definitely a little bit more compact now, a little bit more well-defined exit region of that trough, stronger forcing across this region. So I think Sunday morning may be when this event reaches its peak as far as intensity goes. Probably in the form of a squall line with all this forcing, and how there will be a cold front with this setup. We'll show you that in just a second, and that will be surging off to the east pretty quickly. So probably a linear type setup going into Sunday morning, but that is when intensities of these storms could peak, given stronger forcing aloft moving in at that time frame. And then same thing on the European model. By Sunday morning, that trough really moves in, takes on a much more neutral tilt there, and that is going to, when I think we're going to see the peak of this event Saturday overnight into Sunday. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our surface maps. I'm going to reset things here to the surface so we can take a look at how our surface data, surface pattern is going to progress going into the next few days, and particularly on Saturday. So let's go ahead and go back to the NAM here. Strong cold air intrusion here across the plains, very chilly air here in Norman today, but we have some sunshine that is back yesterday. Very, very cold temperatures, some icing here on the local roadways and objects here on the ground. That is going to, things are going to warm up here for the plains as we get that next trough to make its way in. But that cold front somewhere in here down into central Texas. To the south of that, we have that warm sector, still northerly flow to the south of that frontal boundary. And so we have seen some offshore flow here at this point. Let me quickly pull up the surface observations here across this region. You see, we have had that moisture swept well into the Gulf here. Dew point temperatures in the 20s and 30s across Texas and Louisiana, and so we're going to need some help getting these stronger dew points in. A positive for this setup is that does not look like it's going to be a problem. We should see that trough already start to move into the southern plains by Friday, should start initiating some type of surface low development out here across the southern high plains at that time, which at that point on Friday, the day before our event, that those winds should flip around to more southeasterly to help start pulling that moisture in well ahead of time to allow us to have a broad warm sector despite this cold air intrusion that has taken shape here across the southern U.S. Over the last couple of days. So as we go into the next few days, you see that cold air retreats off to the north a bit. And then as we go into the morning on Friday, already starting to see those winds across Texas flip out of the south. I'll zoom in here real quick to our southern plains sector, and you see 15Z Friday, that's 9 a.m. on Friday morning, tomorrow morning, those winds already starting to flip out of the south across mainland Texas and Oklahoma. That is going to continue through the day. You'll see those winds really out of the east by Friday evening, really starting to pull that moisture back into the inland areas of the southern plains and southeast. So we will have plenty of time for this warm sector to make its way back inland out here for our event on Saturday. And you see there, we do have some semblance of surface low development out here across the central high plains. Friday afternoon, nice surface low developing there in Colorado. You see the counterclockwise flow around that. Strong pressure gradient. Should get pretty windy here tomorrow across the southern plains, given that tightening of the pressure gradient. But surface low develops here. That's why those winds are flipping out of the south and southeast. And that will continue. Surface low moves off to the southeast a little bit going into the day on Saturday. Does broaden out a little bit. Given as we talked about, the kind of sheared out nature of this trough, the NAM I would suspect is a little bit less potent than the other two models, given it the trough geometry aloft. But notice how it's kind of an elongated surface low here. Still some semblance of cyclonic curvature, but overall not a very tightly wound, well-defined surface low here going into the day on Saturday. Certainly loses some definition. And that is not a positive here for severe weather. Usually you like to see a nice well-defined surface low to help really define your boundaries in this setup. Doesn't look to be the case here on Saturday. Going into the evening, overnight hours on Sunday, I'm going to zoom back out. You see very strung out surface low there, banana type surface low as we like to colloquially call it here in storm chasing. Does kind of tighten up once again out across the morning on Sunday, so could see that event persist into the eastern seaboard states there on Sunday. But overall for our Saturday event, not looking all that favorable at the surface here, although we do look to have plenty of time to get that warm, moist air back inland for a broad warm sector on Saturday. GFS. Let's take a look at the GFS. You see that cold air starts to retreat going into the day tomorrow. We start to get robust surface cyclogenesis by tomorrow, late morning into early afternoon out there across eastern Colorado. Pressure gradient really tightens there across the central and southern plains. Very windy tomorrow, and those winds nicely out of the south and southeast to start pumping that moisture in full day at least ahead of time of this event. Surface low does lose some definition, as you see, broadens out there by midday Saturday. A little bit more potent than what the NAM was showing, but still nothing all that special. But you see those warm temperatures there. Broad warm sector out across the southeast states from East Texas eastward into Alabama, providing a lot of real estate for the potential for a long duration severe event. Again, the big question with this event is the overall forcing mechanisms in the open warm sector might preclude that long duration severe threat and allow storms to really stay near the frontal zones where surface convergence and forcing is strongest. Then we go into the day on Sunday, or overnight into Sunday. Surface low really tightens up there as it moves northeast into the northeast U.S., and that should bring the cold front eastward, and then we should be done with things by Sunday evening in the mainland U.S. European model probably will show much of the same. That cold air retreats through the day tomorrow. Surface low development very nice across the central high plains. Winds nicely out of the south and southeast. So very similar picture among the models here with the surface progression. That surface low dips southeast, broadens out going into the day on Saturday. And then we go into Sunday morning, tightens up nicely, and we have a pretty robust wind field here in the low levels. Could lead to the persistence of the event into Sunday morning. Let's take a look at our moisture here now. So we'll take a look at how that moisture that has again been swept into the Gulf over the last day or so with our lead system yesterday. We'll see how this is going to return. So I'm going to zoom in on the southern plains sector here. So this is back to the NAM. You see those 60s and 70s dew points relegated to areas out in the open Gulf, and over here across Alabama this morning. They have since been swept out a little bit more. We'll continue to do so today. But then when you start to see early Friday, we start to see the northward advance of those blues and purples, which are our 60-plus dew points, back toward the Texas coast. And then as that surface low develops across eastern Colorado Friday afternoon, we will see those winds flip around and really start pumping that moisture back into the region. Although it is a little bit delayed. Interestingly enough, we do see those winds flip around pretty quickly to southeasterly, but we don't see the moisture return all that fast, and that may be a result of more easterly flow hanging on here across the coastal areas, which is still pulling in this kind of low dew point air mass into the region. We really need those winds to flip around to more southerly or southeasterly to get that the most robust moisture inland, and that does eventually happen going into the day on Saturday, but it is looking to be somewhat of a just-in-time type moisture event. You see the moisture here still flowing northward by 12Z Saturday. Usually you like to have your moisture already in place by the morning of your severe event. You see those 60s dew points still relegated well down to the south here, out across far southeast Texas, southern Louisiana, and southern Mississippi. Likely as a product of the weaker, more disorganized surface low here that the NAM is showing. But we do eventually see that warm sector get its way northward. And we see these red contours here. That's our lifted index value. Contours are basically a measure of instability. Where the red contours are, you have unstable air. So you see those don't really take shape until 18 to 21Z at the earliest. So it is an air mass that is going to be modifying and becoming more and more favorable with time, but it is going to be probably early afternoon before we start to see anything really robust if this solution continues. And then we see broad warm sector to the north, basically makes it all the way up to the Memphis area here in western Tennessee. But we do have a broad warm sector out here, plenty of room for open warm sector storms. But again, will we have enough forcing in the warm sector to initiate storms during the day? I am skeptical of that. NAM certainly not looking great as well. Going with time, we kind of see a pinched off warm sector. So that is some good news, given that the surface low is strengthening on these model runs with time, which means the low-level wind fields will be strengthening with time. But the warm sector gets really pinched off here out across the southeast states with time going into Sunday morning, and that should temper the overall threat if that solution does come to fruition, with the instability really confined to just the Florida Panhandle and far southern Georgia there. So that is some good news for Sunday, when things I thought might peak overnight Saturday into Sunday. Not looking to be all that favorable here on the NAM run, with a much more pinched warm sector. A few days ago, this was not the case. Let me take a look, a couple model runs back. Let's go to a couple days ago, the evening of a couple days ago. NAM wasn't quite out. Let's talk about yesterday morning's NAM run. You see a lot more robust instability here. Farther northward advance of that moisture, broader warm sector here. So model runs in previous days were a lot more potent with this particular setup. Now not so much, especially going into overnight Saturday into Sunday morning. How about the GFS? Let's take a look at our GFS run with the moisture. Much of the same. Moisture return does start in earnest on Friday and then really begins into Saturday. We do see probably a quicker advance of the moisture here versus what the NAM was showing. This is at 12Z, so 6 a.m. Saturday on the GFS. Let's go to 6 a.m. Saturday on the NAM. And you see that the line between the greens and the blues there, our 60-degree dew point line, relegated down here to the southern portions of those Gulf Coast states, whereas here on the GFS, it's already to the Louisiana-Arkansas border here. So the GFS is a little bit more robust with the moisture return, and this would be a slightly more favorable look for robust severe weather in this setup. So here, probably some type of cold front back in here. A little bit, not quite a very tight moisture gradient there. That cold front kind of sweeps through as the forcing finally pushes through overnight Saturday into Sunday. But a lot of the same here with what the NAM was showing, although we do have a little bit more robust moisture return, a little bit quicker moisture return with the GFS. Kind of this warm sector, it is broad, but it does kind of get pinched off with time here going into the evening hours on Saturday, which is a good sign. And given that this is probably your frontal boundary right in there, that is likely to be your initiating boundary. So if we were to look at our shear vectors with respect to that initiating boundary, very cold front parallel flow in your shear vectors there. So that would indicate a pretty quick transition to a line, along with the fact that the cold front does appear to be surging quite quickly off to the east and southeast, especially Saturday evening into Sunday morning. So this looks to be mostly a QLCS event. Most of your storms, I think, going to be relegated to the frontal zones here, perhaps the warm frontal zone up in here as well. That might be a favorite area for any tornadic activity, although storm mode may get a little messy there, as well as along the cold front with your shear vectors parallel to the cold front, and how fast it's progressing there. Does not look to be an overall super robust event here. Mostly QLCS. Again, we will have to watch the open warm sector for any little confluence bands. But again, weak synoptic scale forcing for ascent over the warm sector may keep that threat at bay as well. Let's see on the NAM real quick if we have any confluence bands. Maybe a little bit here across Louisiana into Mississippi, but very subtle. And again, I don't know if that's going to be enough with such a lack of synoptic scale forcing for ascent in this particular setup. European model with the moisture, let's take a look. Moisture return starts Friday. Definitely more robust than the NAM, really the most robust of the three models. That 60s dew point line already in southern Arkansas and northern Mississippi by 12Z Saturday, and that continues. Very broad warm sector. Looks like the most robust of the warm sectors here out across this area for these three models. Very broad warm sector, a little bit farther west, given that it was the least progressive of the three models. Not all that surprising. Your main moisture boundary back across almost central Texas here at this point. And then things kind of surge through Saturday night into Sunday. So models are pretty much on the same page. Again, at this range, we just want to be looking for the broad overall pattern rather than real specific details. But the models are definitely on the same page here, at least with the overall idea of the setup. Let's take a look at a couple of soundings here. We'll take one at 21Z in the open warm sector there, kind of central Louisiana near Alexandria, just to get an idea of what our warm sector might look like here. So that is on the NAM. How about the GFS? In the same spot there. So this is the NAM. Definitely decent instability for a southeast event over 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. Low-level instability does look to be strong as well, about 140 joules per kilogram with 0 to 3 kilometer cape there, 150 or so. So instability profiles definitely a little on the skinny side, but still we do have some thicker cape down here in the lowest levels of the atmosphere, which could help things out. The low-level wind profiles, not all that favorable, fairly unidirectional flow in the low levels there, given a fairly weak low-level response and a weakening surface low with time. Not a whole lot of really robust directional shear in the low levels, not a real meat-hooking hodograph we like to see for robust tornadic events in the southeast. But definitely strong deep layer shear, lengthy hodographs, effective shear above 40 knots, so plenty of shear to organize storms here with this setup. But really, the tornado threat looks to be perhaps on the lower end with this setup because of the unidirectional wind profiles during the day, and of course the other things we've talked about, storm mode issues and open warm sector questions with storm development there. GFS may be a little bit better, a little bit more curvature here in the low levels of the hodograph, in excess of 200 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, with fairly solid instability as well, 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. Again, this is at 21Z, so 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. Decent instability there, fairly fat in the mid-levels, decent low-level instability as well. So not the worst profile I've ever seen for the southeast during the afternoon. It's just a question of will storms form in the warm sector to take advantage of it, or will we just be relegated to the line along the cold front. Let's go in toward 0Z here. We'll see how the environment progresses with time. Going into overnight Saturday, we should see that low-level jet start ramping up with the increase in intensity of the surface low and just the overall nocturnal ramp up of the low-level jet. And certainly that's what we're seeing here. Wind profile's a lot better. Winds at the surface have backed a little bit, a lot more veering and strengthening with height to lead to more hodograph curvature there. Amid strong deep layer shear, almost 300 meters squared per second squared, effective storm relative helicity. Instability does wane with time, it looks like, here on the NAM. That could be just a NAM quirk, but we do see a little bit of an inversion there. If that does come to fruition, that would definitely temper the intensity of storms overall across these areas. And how about the GFS at 0Z, closer to the frontal zone? We'll take a sounding there as well. So this was the NAM. Instability definitely on the weak side, wind profile certainly favorable, and the GFS still has favorable instability, about 1,000 to 1,100 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, and enough low-level shear to support a tornado risk there. Strong tornadoes don't look really to be in the cards here with these profiles as the models have them here, and we're seeing decent model-to-model consistency within that. but we could have strong enough low-level shear for a tornado risk. Low-level shear vectors, though, need to be oriented right with the overall line, and there are some questions with that as well. So definitely just does not look like an overall really super robust event. I'm just not seeing a real robust event with this. But let's go into the overnight hours, just see how things progress. We do have that warm sector maintaining itself inland across Mississippi and Alabama, even though instability should be waning by this time. Warm sector getting pinched off with time. This is going to be at 6Z, so right about midnight, Saturday into Sunday. Instability definitely at a minimum, but wind profile certainly favorable, so could be some spin-ups within the line, and if any supercells can fire out ahead of the line, which is a huge if with such limited instability and limited instability, that would be those would be favorable for some tornadic activity as well. Here we are on the NAM, very similar wind profiles, similarly weak instability, but certainly adequate to support at least some robustness with ongoing storms going into Saturday night and Sunday morning. So that is going to wrap things up here for this initial video on this event. I'll be back with additional videos if the setup warrants. Right now, it does not look like an overall super potent event. We will see severe weather on Saturday into the morning on Sunday. The question is how robust it will be. Right now, not looking all that robust in my opinion here. The SPC does have that enhanced risk here across the orange shaded region. So that includes places like Shreveport, Alexandria, Jackson, Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, over into western Alabama. So that is where they expect the most robust storms to be, and they do have a significant severe weather contour out with a 30% hatched overall severe weather contour. So they are expecting some significant severe weather out across that enhanced risk area, but there are several caveats to this setup that I think are going to preclude a bigger event. Number one, the overall questions over storm initiation in the warm sector. Does not look like we have a lot of forcing to keep any storms that fire in the warm sector going and really reach their potential. So storms that do fire in the warm sector may really struggle out here on Saturday, and we may have storms that are relegated to mostly the frontal zones along the cold front back here to the west, and the warm frontal zone off to the north could be where the most likely areas for robust severe storms are, given the lack of forcing over the warm sector. Stronger convergence along these frontal zones means a little bit better forcing to get storms to go. If that's the case, storm mode is looking to be a little bit on the messy side, especially along the cold front, where shear vectors are very parallel to that frontal zone, and going into the evening on Saturday into Sunday morning, that cold front really surges off to the southeast, and so the progressive nature of the front and line parallel shear vectors should lead to more of a linear transition here, fairly quick transition to a linear mode with storms along the cold front as well as the warm front. Things can get a little grungy there as well. But still, damaging winds, perhaps a few tornadoes with this setup do look to be in the cards. And whether that's in the form of open warm sector supercells or cold frontal storms, they should pack a punch nonetheless. But we'll continue to monitor this setup over the coming days. I'll have updates as needed on the social media feeds as we get some more data in tomorrow into Saturday morning. And if the setup warrants, I'll be back Saturday morning with a new video on this overall setup. But for now, that's all we have. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.